Happy Sunday. You're listening to In My Humble Opinion on Rainbow Radio. I'm your host, Nice Guy Eddie. So, same-sex marriage is the law of the land, or now as it shall be called, marriage. Because last time I checked, my friend who is gay does not drive a gay car, live in a gay house, have a gay job, or eat a gay cake. He is simply married. And it's that simple. But the religious right has lost their fucking minds, haven't they? Oh my God, it's like they didn't see this coming. You know, I mean, of course, ironically, some of the craziest ones actually got sane after this. The one preacher who was going to set himself on fire, for example, decided against it, much to my disappointment. Man, I had the marshmallows, I had the graham crackers. If somebody brought chocolate, I was all set. I got to tell you. But he pussed out, which of course we all knew was going to happen. I mean, nobody really took that guy seriously, except, of course, a year earlier, a guy actually did that. But anyway, yeah, that actually did happen, believe it or not. But in 2014, a preacher set himself on fire, supposedly to protest gay marriage, although personally I just think we should feel sorry for the mentally ill, because I have to think, you know, anybody who's going to take something like that to completion, yeah, not altogether there. But they've lost their collective minds. They're afraid that their religion is going to be taken away from them, and it's open war on Christians. You know, it'll be just like the Nazis who persecuted homosexuals right along with the Jews. Oh yeah. Well, listen. There's a very simple test here. Well, beyond the constitutional test of the First Amendment, which is essentially now you watch. All of the Christians now will start embracing the separation of church and state like a motherfucker. You watch. We've been screaming about the separation of church and state for 20, 30 years now. Since 1980, I guess, if you've been around that long. We've been screaming about the separation of church and state for that long, and they keep saying, well, the separation of church and state is not in the Constitution. Well, funny, because I can look at the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, and you know what I don't see in there? I don't see the word Bible in there. I don't see Jesus in there. I don't see Christianity in there. I don't see God, heaven, soul. Any of these kinds of words are conspicuously absent from all of our founding documents. But it didn't stop them from making that argument that somehow you can read the First Amendment, that Congress shall make no law regarding the establishment of a religion, and somehow I don't know how anybody can conclude anything along the lines of, therefore, we are a Christian nation. Well, that would seem like we've established it. Do you know how to read? Do you know what words mean, religious people? Anyway, so you watch. You mark my words. They're now going to be screaming about the separation of church and state. And I'll be honest. I mean, if I can get serious for a moment, because I'm going to get a little bit humorous here in a minute. So if I can get serious for a minute, I will say this. The day the government actually turns around and tries to force churches to marry certain people or preach a certain thing, I will be forced to do something I hate to do, which is to defend actual religion. I don't think religion needs a great defense. Religious liberty is its own defense. But the minute the government actually says, no, you have to marry these people, and says this to this church, believe me, I will be the first one to turn around and scream separation of church and state as loud as I have been screaming it for the last 25 years. Actually, long, 80, about 30 years. Shit. 35 years. Anyway, I did want to put a test out there, though, because, you know, it can be difficult to navigate some of this stuff. I mean, you know, what happens if a pharmacist is Catholic and Catholics aren't allowed to use birth control pills? Does he have to fill a prescription for birth control pills? Yes! His religion, or her religion, because let's face it, if it's his religion, that's kind of silly, but the Catholic religion prevents you from taking birth control pills, not dispensing them. And this is the thing that most religious people don't understand. They don't understand that their religion is a prohibition on their behavior only. I mean, that's like, imagine this. Imagine as a Christian, you're sitting here eating a nice bacon, lettuce, and tomato sandwich. Maybe you put guacamole on it, then it can be an LGBT. Think about that for a minute. But you're eating a nice BLT. And a Jewish person comes up and says, I can't eat bacon. Why not? Because I'm Jewish. Well, you're Jewish. Great. So you can't eat bacon. Doesn't mean you don't get to take it away from me. I like my bacon. Some people don't eat bacon for religious reasons. I don't do religion for bacon reasons. But seriously, that's what it means. I mean, if a Jewish person just said that to a Christian, the Christian would look at them like they were cracked, and they'd be right to do so. And yet somehow, for all this time, they've been acting like, oh, we're supposed to follow their religion, even though we don't actually follow their religion. So anyway, but we need a guide here because now clerks down in Texas were given the permission by that state's commissioner or attorney general, or I can't remember this asshole's name, but he was basically saying, defy the Supreme Court, don't issue the marriage licenses, and nothing will happen to you. Well, aside from losing your job and the state of Texas getting sued and wasting all kinds of taxpayer money on frivolous lawsuits, they know they couldn't possibly win. Not frivolous lawsuits. Let me take that back. A frivolous defense. Defending lawsuits that they cannot win. They already know they can't win. It's already been decided. It was decided last week. They cannot win. Okay? People have the right to marry. End of story. That's not really up for debate anymore. And people means all people. I mean, hell, corporations have been marrying each other for long enough. It's about time that gays have been allowed to. Anyway, these people are saying, well, I don't approve of gay marriage. Well, nobody asked your permission. You're being paid by my tax money to issue licenses to the public. If your religious beliefs somehow interfere with that, then I suggest you find another line of work. It's that simple. It's that simple. The county clerk has no authority to decide who does and does not get married. He fills out fucking paperwork, for Christ's sake. When me and my wife got married, we got no religious test. We were asked no questions. We had to prove that we were of legal age. That's okay. All contracts, all legal contracts, you have to demonstrate that. And there are legal reasons, legal protections in place for minors that make sense if you actually look at them. So yeah, we had to prove that we were a certain age, but that was it. Nobody got to decide it. It's pretty much issued, and now it will be pretty much issued for everybody. But you know what this asshole in Texas is trying to do? He's trying to get someone fired. He's trying to get the state sued so that they can sit back and say, look at this, my religious liberty is under attack. That's exactly what he's trying to do. And, if somebody loses their job, all the better, because they won't have lost their job for being a bigoted asshole. They'll have lost their job just for being a Christian. Right. In Texas. So anyway, I think this is important. So this actually came from a Huffington Post. I want to give credit to that. This is how to determine if your religious liberty is being threatened in just 10 quick questions. And before I read them, I want you to try something. Say the words religious liberty 5 times fast. It's very difficult, and I'm about to say it 10 times. And you watch, I'm going to screw it up at least once. Don't laugh at me. It's harder than you think. Anyway, here are 10 questions to determine if your religious liberty is being threatened. Number 1, my religious liberty is at risk because A, I am not allowed to go to a religious service of my own choosing. B, others are allowed to go to a religious service of their own choosing. My religious liberty is at risk. This is number 2. My religious liberty is at risk because A, I am not allowed to marry the person I love legally, even though my religious community blesses my marriage. B, some states refuse to enforce my own particular religious beliefs on marriage on those 2 guys in line down at the courthouse. 3, my religious liberty is at risk because A, I am being forced to use birth control. B, I am unable to force others not to use birth control. 4, my religious liberty is at risk because A, I am not allowed to pray privately. B, I am not allowed to force others to pray the prayers of my faith publicly. 5, my religious liberty is at risk because A, being a member of my faith means that I can be bullied without legal recourse. Or B, I am not allowed to use my faith to bully gay kids with impunity. 6, my religious liberty is at risk because A, I am not allowed to purchase, read, or possess religious books or materials. B, others are allowed to have access to books, movies, and websites that I don't like. 7, my religious liberty is at risk because A, my religious group is not allowed equal protection under the Establishment Clause. B, my religious group is not allowed to use public funds, buildings, and resources as we would like for whatever purposes we might like. 8, my religious liberty is at risk because A, another religious group has been declared the official faith of my country. B, my own religious group is not being given status as the official faith of my country. 9, my religious liberty is at risk because A, my religious community is not allowed to build a house of worship in my community. B, a religious community I don't like wants to build a house of worship in my community. And finally, my religious liberty is at risk because A, I am not allowed to teach my children the creation stories of our faith at home. B, public school science classes are teaching science. Now, If you were following along, and I do know it was a long test, hopefully you wrote down your A's and your B's, and I want to say that if you answered A to any question, then perhaps your religious liberty is indeed at stake. You and your faith group have every right to now advocate for equal protection under the law. But just remember this one little constitutional concept: that means you can fight for equality, not superiority. Now, if you answered B to any question, then not only is your religious liberty not at stake, but there's a strong chance that you are the one oppressing the religious liberty of others. This is the point in which I would invite you to refer back to the tenets of your faith, especially the ones about your neighbors. Now, it might seem after all of that I'm very hostile when it comes to religion, and in truth, I'm not. In truth, I gotta be honest, I do not wish to deprive anybody of the peace and the solace and the just the life-affirming feeling that they get from practicing it, But again, it just I think it was a picture of Maggie Smith. I doubt she ever said that, but if you could picture this in her voice. Religion, my dear, is like a penis. It's a perfectly fine thing for one to have and to take pride in. But when one whips it out in public and waves it in my face, we have a problem. And that's really it. The religious folks in this country do not understand this idea of, they don't know how to be principled. Okay? For example, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Pretty principled, it's the golden rule. It's actually, you can solve almost any moral dilemma that way. It's pretty easy to think about. But here's the thing. It depends on how you interpret as they would do unto you. Because, of course, every Christian is going, well, I wish they would do everything possible to save my soul. Yeah, that's what you're saying now because you can't really think about alternatives. But when you are in a public classroom and you're saying, why should we take prayer out of the classroom? Why should we take God out of the classroom? Of course, they always assume it's their God that we're talking about. And it amazes me that these same very religious people would do such an about-face if their child's teacher were a Muslim and trying to have them pray to Allah 5 times a day in the classroom. Now, as much as I will defend the Muslims in general from Islamophobia, you better believe that I would be standing right next to the fundamentalist Christian saying, no, this is not going to happen. Okay, the difference is I'd be saying no prayer in school, and they'd be saying, you're saying it wrong. You're supposed to say Jesus, not Muhammad. But that's just it. It really comes down to principles. It really comes down to treating others the way you mean treated. In other words, respect your faith. You don't want me shoving my ideas down your throat. Don't shove your ideas down my throat. It's that simple. Well, wait a minute. What about all this gay stuff? They're shoving it down our throats. No, they're not. They're existing. Okay, they're existing. My favorite one was Pat Robertson is saying that gay marriage and the gay community. Now, the next step in the radical gay agenda, is it non-discrimination and for employment? Is it better health care? Is it equality for transgender people? No. The next step in the radical gay agenda is that the gays are going to force Christians to like anal sex. Yeah, this was serious. This was actually on my Facebook feed this morning. And the comments were hilarious, as you might imagine. And of course, there's that one picture of both Bill O'Reilly and Pat Robertson both making a very pained face, and they stack them next to each other, and it's very disturbing. Yeah, I'll let that mental image sink into your head for a moment. But, force Christians to like anal sex. The funny thing about this, I took a human sexuality class in college, and one of the things that I was surprised to learn, I do not remember the exact numbers, but they gave them, and this was when I was very young, very impressionable, very Republican, believe it or not. At the time, yes, shame to admit, but I was young and I was stupid, and we all believe a lot of stupid bullshit when we're young. They were giving them some survey results. And I mean, surveys on sex are always, because you never know who's too ashamed to admit it, and you never know who's maybe bragging and exaggerating a little bit. But they came to the section on anal sex, which, I'm sorry, but if you're in a group of mixed company, that's still like something most straight, like cishet people who aren't in a form like what I am in right now, it's not something most people want to talk about. But in any case, they gave the numbers, and surprisingly, to my young mind, when it came to gay couples, of course, the number was a lot less than 100%. Of course, I had to think lesbians. Okay, well, all right, but it was a lot less than 50%. Put it that way, or whatever the percentage is. It was, in other words, the percentage of gay couples that engage in anal sex was actually much lower than I'd expected. And then it came to heterosexual couples, and of course, I was also very shocked to learn the number was greater, significantly greater than 0. And I immediately began thinking, well, wait a minute, oh, gotcha. Okay, I'm with you now. And of course, that was just back in the day. That was in my, again, I'm only thinking about that going in one direction. Learned about other implements and whatnot later in life, not firsthand. I'm just joking. I'm not going to talk about myself, but it was an interesting number. And I'm not going to suggest that these percentages overlap. I'm not going to suggest that heterosexual people have more anal sex than homosexual people. I'm not. But my point is one group it was a lot less than you think, and one group it was a lot more than you think. And I guess this is where where good old Uncle Pat needs to learn. Nobody needs to be forced to like anal sex, Pat. There are people of all walks of life who already do. And the ones who don't, from what I'm told, force is not really the way to get them to like it. Just saying. Now, a really funny thing is that Ted Cruz apparently didn't get the memo. Ted Cruz wants to make not only the repeal of Obamacare, but also gay marriage, basically a front and center issue for the 2016 election. And it was funny because there was a liberal actually. I don't know if they were liberal. They were LGBT positive because they had the profile picture done with the rainbow motif, which is funny because for the last few days my Facebook feeds it looks like a war broke out between the Confederacy and a Skittles factory. Okay, but they had the rainbow motif going, and they had said that the Supreme Court basically gave the Republicans a huge gift by basically killing the last hope to get rid of Obamacare, and by settling the same-sex marriage issue once and for all. Basically, the Republicans couldn't trip over their own dicks come 2016 talking about issues that are essentially losers. And the funny thing is, I told this person that they're overestimating the wisdom of Republicans here. I said, no, you're not getting it. They're going to absolutely still make this an issue. In fact, I don't think this is going away anytime soon, but it absolutely is a loser for them. And as time goes on, it's going to be more and more of a loser. But Ted Cruz has already announced he wants to make this issue front and center. Now, I don't think any of the legitimate, Rand Paul said a few things. Jeb Bush is staying away from this. Lindsey Graham, Lindsey Graham is the most frustrating Republican in the world for me because I swear he has a rate of about 50% of making sense. I swear to God, I know a lot of people who don't like Lindsey Graham and say, what are you talking about? I'm saying whenever I hear the man speak, about half of the time I'm thinking, wow, this guy gets it. This is a Republican who's not completely nuts. And then I wait a few seconds and he keeps talking and that image goes out the window. But it's about 50% of what he says makes perfect sense. Now, Lindsey Graham is on record already as saying basically, guys, we got to get over this. Just forget about same-sex marriage. Let's move on. There's other things. And he's right. I don't think any of those things are winners for the Republicans either. The economy, healthcare, foreign policy. I don't know what they're planning on running on here, especially since there's not going to be a black guy on the ticket. The opposing ticket. Well, no, let's face it. I'm sorry, Dr. Carson, but there's not going to be a black guy on the Republican ticket either. I think we all know that, except nobody told Ben Carson. But they're going to continue to run this. And the reason they're going to continue to run this is because the Republicans now, finally, after 35 years, have finally fallen off this tiger they've been riding, and they're about to get mauled by it. And this started in 1980, of course. Ronald Reagan makes this pact with the moral majority, led at the time by Jerry Falwell, but also people like James Dobson and Pat Robertson, and at the time, Jimmy Swaggart and Jim Baker and these guys. And it energized a portion of the electorate that hadn't really been catered to before. The problem is, I don't think they understood what monsters these people are, and they just kept getting more and more. And the more they got, the more persecuted they felt, and the more they wanted. And so 35 years later, now basically, they so control, the social conservatives so control the Republican Party and are so out of step with mainstream America. And most of the politicians, not the Ted Cruzes of the world, but the more practical ones, the Jeb Bushes, the Jeff Christies, the Chris Christies, the Rand Pauls. These guys know these are loser issues. They know they're not going to win running on these. And the problem, though, is that they're stuck now. They either can abandon the moral majority and just try to go for the big corporate money, go back to being the party of big business only. I mean, they're the party of big business now, but go back to the party of being big business and lose the moral majority. Well, can you imagine the Republicans getting elected on an economic platform? I mean, come on. The only reason they've had so many working class white people voting for them all these years is because they've been pandering to their religion, because it's been all about God, gays, and guns. Guns by themselves aren't really going to sell out over jobs, guys. I'm sorry. You need racism. You need homophobia. You need religious fanaticism to appeal to. Okay? The Republicans running on a business-only platform, not going to work. Not going to work at all. So they have a choice. They can abandon them, or, and this is unfortunately where they need to go, they need to further embrace them, okay, because they can't afford to lose them. They can't, if they lose them, then they have to actually have a platform that appeals to the middle class, and then they'll lose the big money. So basically they're in a point where, okay, we have to continue to embrace these folks. So they vote for our platform, and our platform's going to create the big money. The problem is that these folks have now grown so loud and so delusional and so extreme that they're alienating the middle more and more and more. And you know what? In a partisan sense, yeah, you can predict that the Republicans are probably going to dominate the Southeast, and the Republicans are probably going to dominate the mountain states. You know, the Democrats are going to win in the Northeast. You know, they're going to win the Pacific West, except for Alaska, which is a Pacific state but votes like a mountain state, let's face it. You know, and then, of course, they're going to battle over basically the Midwest and Florida. But they're getting more and more extreme with this religious stuff, and it's alienating a younger, middle class, younger Democratic electorate, and moderate and the middle of the electorate. Okay? They're also, of course, going full-blown racist because, let's face it, they only really want to embrace white people, and that's beginning to piss off all the immigrants. Now, this is a suicide for the Republicans because Latino immigrants, you know, as a group, now I'm not talking about individuals, but as a group tend to be a very socially conservative group. I know a lot of both people in Mexico because we have plants down there, and I know a lot of people that are transplants. And even if the people at my age are liberal, oh boy, are their parents social conservatives, but they tend to vote Democrat. Why? Well, because the Republicans can't seem to shut the fuck up about how lazy and filthy and disease-ridden and violent and crime-oriented all these Mexicans are. Well, you know, you're not going to win on that, guys. And the problem with the Republicans now, they're not going to win, and the smart money is beginning to abandon them. And how do I know that? Well, very simple. What is every liberal's complaint about Hillary Clinton? Oh, too close to Wall Street, too much corporate money coming to her. Why do you think that is, guys? It's because the corporations are looking at the Republicans going, these guys aren't going to win. Better have some money in the pocket of somebody who's actually going to win. That way maybe we can wield a little bit of influence still. You know, it's simple math, okay? But, you know, if I'm the Republican Party now, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. If I embrace the big money, I lose the, and by kicking the moral majority there and I use that term very, I'm being sarcastic, of course, but, you know, then they've got nobody to vote for them. But if they embrace that, then they're still going to lose votes in the middle, and they're going to lose the big money in the long run. How did we get here? Well, it's very simple. And you go back to what conservatives and Republicans and business folks were saying back in the late 70s, back in the early 80s. Barry Goldwater said this. And I mean, you know, Barry Goldwater today would be a crazy liberal. He'd be a Democrat. He'd have to be a Democrat. The Republicans wouldn't have him. But he was the one who was saying, you embrace the preachers, you lose the party. Now, it took a lot longer, I think, than most people expected, because I think realistically, I mean, obviously we had 8 years of George Bush, so it obviously worked for him. Karl Rove knew how to make it work. I don't think he's the architect. I don't think he's the genius, and I can get into that if anybody wants to challenge me on that. But basically, I think, you know, they saw the strategy, they made it work for him, but I think it's very obvious it's not going to work anymore, because the more these people rail against the immigrants, the more they rail against the gays, and the more they try, and abortion has totally become the litmus test issue for women's rights in general, so they're more and more alienating women. I mean, can you imagine a pro-life, strong anti-abortion guy running against Hillary Clinton? Why? I mean, I know there are conservative women who will still vote for them, but why would any moderate? I think about that. So they're in a tight spot. They're in a tight spot. And the point being that the Supreme Court was supposed to make this easy on them by settling these issues. And you've got people like Ted Cruz and Donald Trump out there talking about the immigrants, and Ted Cruz wanting to make these social issues front and center. They're never going to learn. They're never going to learn. And you know what? Ultimately, that's what conservatism is. Conservatism is a philosophy which says never learn. Now, I know there might be some conservative folks out there, but bear with me a minute. Conservatism is not about a party. It is not about being one party or the other, and which party is the more conservative party changes over time. All you have to do is look at the national electoral maps prior to 1964 and since 1964 to see how that's changed. So here's the thing. If you look at any moment in time, I don't care if you want to pick the Roman Empire, I don't care if you want to pick the Southern Confederacy, I don't care if you want to pick the French monarchy, I don't care. Pick a moment in history. And think about all of the stupid stuff that they did at the time that eventually was done away with. Well, you can't say that it's liberals and progressives that were trying to hold on to tradition. That's not what those words mean. It's always conservatives trying to argue for tradition. They did this. That was the centerpiece of their opposition to same-sex marriage. They kept saying traditional. That's all they can say. They're like pull string dolls. You pull the string and they say traditional. Well, when you argue for tradition, there's nothing wrong with arguing for tradition, but it means that over time, you're going to accumulate quite a lot of stupid shit and a lot of mental baggage that you've defended that a generation or two later looks pretty dumb. Okay? You cannot say that it was the liberals who wanted to defend slavery just because the party of the South at the time were Democrats. Of course it was conservatives who were fighting to keep slavery alive, because it's the same people now that are flying the Confederate flag and talking about Southern pride and saying God didn't give any Negro the authority to govern over a white man. You know, these are conservatives, and they always were conservatives. Okay? Sure, the conservatives change over time, but they change slowly. And they don't change until a good portion of them get very old and rather embarrassing. Okay? And only then do the younger people come up, and then they start discovering. It usually starts with libertarianism. Libertarianism is something that appeals to younger people, mainly because, like I said, when we're young, we all believe a lot of stupid bullshit. but they start with that, and then, you know, as they get older, maybe they start getting a little more conservative or whatnot. But you know, but they're going to change, because of course they're not going to be like I'm not going to be like my grandmother on one side of the family that we won't mention, talking about the colored girl. And you know, that was the one she liked. She liked that colored girl. That colored girl's okay. Really? Gee, I hope she hasn't set the bar very high there, Grandma. And if my grandmother should happen to hear this, I'm talking about the one that's dead. I'm sure she can figure that out, I hope. But you know, that's just it. It's always going to be the conservatives standing up for the stupid bullshit. And the conservatives of any one generation, the liberals of 6 generations ago. You know, it's always the progressives that are looking forward. And don't get me wrong, I think in a functioning society, you do need both. You do need somebody to constantly move forward to make sure that we don't hang on to stupid bullshit. And you do need the traditionalist to make sure that we don't throw anything out that's actually a good idea, or that maybe works, but maybe just needs to be tweaked a little bit. We don't want to burn it to the ground. Okay? And the thing is, though, that guy should really not be put in charge. Okay? Conservatism is best served in the opposition. And obviously I'm biased when I say that, but when you think about it, if all you're doing when you lead is defend everything that we've already had all along, well, how are you going to solve problems? And of course, those of us who've been paying attention for the last 25 years realize conservatives have no intention of solving problems. They have an intention of profiting off of them, making these problems work for them, all the while denying that they even exist. One of the other Supreme Court decisions, by the way, this was lost in the celebration over same-sex marriage, which I think was, you know, right. We were right to celebrate that, absolutely. But lost in that discussion was they struck down something else, and these are a lot of these mandatory sentences and 3-strike-you're outlaws. Yeah, and this is what a lot of people don't understand, is that these laws were put in place not to be tough on crime. And I said this a few programs ago. These were not put in place to be tough on crime. These were put in place specifically to fill prisons. Okay, they were there to fill prisons. Why were they there to fill prisons? Simple. We have a for-profit prison industry in this country. This was something else that the Republicans sold us, that the Libertarians sold us, and Bill Clinton signed off on it. Well, he signed off on the three strikes you're out. I mean, the privatization trend had been in place since Reagan. Really, had been some of it had even started under Nixon. But we've privatized a lot of our prisons. They're no longer public institutions. They're still paid for by tax money, but somehow it's more efficient. And in a way, they are more efficient and they're profitable, which I don't understand why profitable, if it's my tax money, why should it be done at a profit for someone else? But whatever, never mind. I'm just going to sip my tea and mind my own business there. But they're only profitable if they're full. I mean, basically, if you have a for-profit prison that's at 50% capacity, it's not making any money. They need prisoners in there. So forget, I think the cutoff was about 95% full. I heard that back in the day. That was back in the early 90s. I don't know. I don't remember where I heard it, I'll be honest, but something like 95% full. So what did we do? We stuffed them to 120% capacity because, we're America, damn it. And Americans have a real problem when it comes to crime and punishment anyway. If you think about it, if you go to Europe, you can see a police car coming from 17 kilometers away. They're bright yellow and green. They have flashing lights. They say police all over them. The car body is white, but it's covered in all kinds of day glow shit and stuff. They're visible. What do we do in America? We make them black. We make them look like anything else. We make the lights really tiny so that you don't know you're about to be pulled over until you're getting pulled over. And why do we do that? Because we don't actually want people to drive the speed limit. I mean, if we wanted people to drive the speed limit, we would have visible cop cars. No, we want people to speed and then give them tickets. And that's just it. Is actually the whole three strikes you're out thing was not for rehabilitation. It was not for safety. We wanted people in prison, and we wanted people in prison to make it profitable. And hey, if we could do this just to black people, even better. Because who's going to complain? Who gives a shit about black people? Not us. Not America. But anyway, it was a profit motive, and the whole idea here was that it was supposed to make government smaller somehow. I don't know why government is smaller when just instead of the government doing it, it's a private company being paid by the government. I don't know why that counts as smaller government. If we're now doing the same service, but we're doing it at a profit, I can't see how the government is paying less. But again, that's none of my business. But again, this privatization has been going on for a long time. But the Supreme Court struck down one of the very laws that make it work. Because, of course, it's wildly unconstitutional just to say, no matter what the circumstances, you're getting 15 to life. And if you may not know this, but actually the very first guy, after Bill Clinton signed the three strikes you're outlaw at the federal level, the very first guy to get tripped up was actually, no, I apologize. This was in California, so this must have been the state. This must have been the state law. I don't recall, but the first guy, I remember reading about the first guy who got three strikes you're out. He got it because he held up a cappuccino stand. And don't get me wrong, okay, he obviously had to be convicted of 2 other violent felonies, and why is the guy robbing a cappuccino stand? And some of us laugh and say he should just be put away for stupidity. But think about it. He held up a cappuccino stand. I mean, can you imagine you're in prison? You're in prison for life. What'd you do? Robbed a cappuccino stand. I hope you're big. I hope you're hulking. Because if you're in life for robbing a cappuccino stand, you've got problems. Now there's something else, and this goes along the theme of religion. There's something else that conservatives, and usually it's conservatives, there are a few liberals, I guess I could count myself a little bit among them. The other religion, of course, is capitalism. And I say that I'm a capitalist, but you know what? I'm not the kind of capitalist that Ted Cruz would call a capitalist. I'm the kind of capitalist that most right-wingers would call a communist or a socialist. On the other hand, actual communists have literally spit at me. But bottom line, I think that there is something to be said that when you're doing something for a profit motive, you want to do it efficiently. You want to do it at a reasonable cost because that's, of course, the only way you're going to make a profit. And if you think about how markets work, if I'm gouging somebody, well, if somebody can come along and do it cheaper than me, they're going to get the business. At least in theory, that's how it works. And I think it does work in a lot of venues. I mean, I remember during the auto crisis, Michael Moore, somebody who... I don't want to say I admire him. I admire him for about the first 30 minutes of any one of his films, but then like by the end I'm going, come on, I get it already. Oh my God, when is this movie over? And of course I'm really angry, but which he's trying to make me. But Michael Moore had actually come out and said on CNN that the government should nationalize the auto industry. Nationalize it. Soviet Union style. And force them to make, fuel-efficient cars or some such thing. Now, don't get me wrong. I think that the auto industry, of which I work in, I should add and should disclose, would have been better served with most of these years with higher fuel economy. But the idea that we're going to achieve this by the government taking it over is absurd. You pass regulations and then you let people go and innovate. But there are some areas that I don't think the profit motive really is going to get you a good result. There's 5 that I'd like to list off, just so people know that while I do say I'm a capitalist, I do have a heart and I'm not completely stupid. The first one, obviously, is incarceration. Justice in general. Justice in general. Somebody should not be convicted or acquitted based on the amount of money they have. Now, of course, anybody who's familiar with the American justice system is laughing their ass off at that thought. But basically, no, you should not, justice, your conviction, your arrest, your treatment under the law should not be a function of how much money you have, nor should the sentence you receive, nor should we sentence people based on what's profitable for the prison. I mean, justice should be blind, justice should be fair, justice should consider all mitigating circumstances, justice should be individual for each case, and certainly nobody should be in the back thinking, well, 20 years would be more cost effective. No, and that goes both ways. I mean, if somebody deserves life in prison, they're saying, well, 10 years would be more cost effective. I don't think that's fair to victims. I mean, we want these decisions being made intelligently. Now, that's not to say that they are, but I don't think anybody would argue with me that putting money into that would make it any better. Another one is education. This is one of my pet causes. I am firmly against charter schools. Now, to anyone out there who has their kids in charter schools, it's not, I understand you were in a bad situation. Your public school system probably wasn't meeting their needs. I question whether or not the charter school is meeting their needs. That depends. That's going to vary on case-to-case basis. But bottom line, I don't think my tax money should pay for private schooling. My tax money should pay for a good public school system. We should all demand a good public school system. There's ways to make that work, but we've all sort of given into the political reality that that's not going to work. And so we've embraced the charter school, which is kind of like a private school, but kind of not, because you don't pay for it. Here's the thing. I got an article once a while back from my dad sent this to me in my email, and I open it up, and it's the case against charter school. It's the case for charter schools. I'm sorry, and it basically says everything that's wrong with education in America. And it was coming from the Wall Street Journal, so you might be able to find this article. I'll post it on my blog if anybody is interested. But let me paraphrase. Blah, 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 I hate liberals. Blah, 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 public school teacher unions. Blah, 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 tax money. Blah, 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 big government. Blah, 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 I hate liberals. Blah. Well, that's pretty much the way it read. It was all just opinion and invective. Oh, but rah, rah, public schools. Rah, rah, charter schools. And blah, blah, I hate public schools. That's pretty much what it sounded like. And something about budget cuts and whatnot. Now, it finally got to the end, and it gave some data finally. And it used an example. It said that the Brooklyn Academy of Excellence or something like that. I can't remember. Again, if anybody wants to call me out on this, I can look it up. But it said that 80% of the students that were in this academy passed this one standard state test, as opposed to only 30% in the public school system. Now let's think about that for a minute. 80% is, after all, much larger than 30%. But let me use the logic. Let me show you what they did in something that would be totally nonpartisan. Now, I don't know how many sports fans there are out there, but this is a pretty easy one, so follow me for a moment. If I were to pose the question, who the better hitting league is in Major League Baseball, the American League or the National League, what would you say? Most people might say the American League, I suppose. Let's just say the American League because, I don't know, the designated hitter and the pitchers don't have to bat, and, generally speaking, they score more runs on average, so the American League's probably the better hitting league. And I were to turn around and say, no, I can prove to you the National League is the better hitting league because last year in 2014, Justin Morneau of the Colorado Rockies hit .319 to lead his league. He hit .319, and that was against the American League average of a mere .253. Now, at this point, I think even non-sports fans can see why what I just said is completely idiotic. The funny thing is, the average Wall Street Journal reader would apparently not get what I just did. Because that's what they did in this article. This was this great article that was going to solve everything and was going to tell me this is everything that's wrong with American education. And I'm reading it thinking, you're a great example of that if you fell for this nonsense, because of course they picked the very top performing school. How do I know that? How do I know it was the top performing school? Because it was the one they picked. And they compared it against the average, against the entire public school system, not individual schools, the entire school system. Well, obviously, you can't compare one superlative to the average and expect these to compare. That's idiotic. And it's as dumb as the baseball example I just gave. But, this was supposedly proof positive. And there was really nothing else, no other statistical or concrete objective evidence given. Just sort of like a, how can we believe with all these unions and liberals and blah. That was pretty much how the rest of it read. Well, here's the thing. Every broad measure of all charter schools compared to all public schools, in other words, you look at the systems in a big picture sense, has shown no difference between the two. No difference at all. Well, if they're all going to hit 253, so to speak, or they're all going to have a 30% rate on average or whatever, you might say, well, then what's the difference? Why do you care if your tax money's paying for them or not? Well, wouldn't you say that they're giving a product that's just as good? Well, first of all, I don't think just as good is good enough when my tax money is going to something which is essentially private enterprise and paying for something that was a public good. But here's the other thing about the fact that they're the same. They get to decide who comes into their classrooms. They can kick you out. They get to control the classroom size. Meanwhile, public schools have to take all comers. Everybody, if there's a few more hundred kids in the district, going to have to cram a few more in the classroom. What about those remedial kids? We're going to have to take them. What about the special needs kids? We're going to have to take them. What about these kids with single parents who don't help them with their homework? Well, we're going to have to take them. The charter schools, they don't have to take them. They can control everything. They get to handpick their people. Okay? And even with all of those structural advantages, the charter school industry has never been able to demonstrate that they perform better than the public school system in any broad-based sense. Never. Okay, so that's education. Number 3, healthcare. Healthcare, I think this is an obvious one. A lot of people think that maybe we should have profit in healthcare because you got to keep costs down. You don't want a 100-year-old person getting a knee replacement. Well, wait a minute though. Let's think about that a moment, and let's go back to that golden rule. And remember too, most of what the right-wing opposition to the Affordable Care Act, aka the ACA, aka Obamacare, was the lie of the year of 2000, and I think it was 2013. The death panels. They're going to have death panels to keep the cost down, and of course, only Republicans are bitching about cost. Isn't that the thing about liberals? We just spend all the damn money. Well, anyway, so they're bitching about the cost, but they're saying we're going to have death panels. Okay, as if the insurance companies weren't death panels before Obamacare. But here's the thing. It comes down to it. Why do I not worry about cost? Why do I not want... I want it to be cost effective. I want everyone to have access to it. And I'm willing to pay for that. Okay, I think we're all going to have to put in and pay for that. That's okay. But what I don't want is I don't want my doctor going, what drug should I prescribe? The one that I think is going to work best or the one that I get the biggest commission on? Again, I think we can all see that when people are making medical decisions, money really shouldn't play into it. And when people say, well, wait a minute, what about cost, benefit, reward? Let me ask you something. You're sitting in a hospital. You can't walk because your knee's blown out. Do you really want people discussing the cost-benefit analysis of giving you a knee surgery? Or do you want them to fix your knee so you can go back to your life? Well, I don't think anybody is going to just voluntarily, again, in any principled manner, say, yeah, you know what? I'm kind of a lazy bum. I don't really need my knee. Fuck it, I'll hobble around on crutches from now on. I don't think anybody's going to say that. Well, if you're not willing to say that, you have no place, you have no right to expect anybody else to volunteer for that. So bottom line, we're back down to this idea that everybody should have health care and we should all put in for it. And those of us with more means should put in a little bit more. Ultimately, though, it's not about the rich subsidizing the poor. Insurance works because the healthy subsidize the sick and the young subsidize the old, and that's okay too. But again, I don't think that that profit has anything, should have any influence over medical decision making. So let's see, we've got prisons, we've got education, we've got medicine. Oh yes, the military. I've said on my show before that economic policy and foreign policy unfortunately get too intertwined. And this is what I mean by that. We go into wars over profit. I mean, I don't think we went into Afghanistan over profit because there's nothing Afghanistan ever had that we really wanted. Except for Al-Qaeda, we wanted them and the Taliban wouldn't give them to us. And so we bombed the shit out of them and then let Al-Qaeda escape. Didn't really work out that well. But that's okay because Bush's predecessor went ahead and finished that job. Now, in the meantime, we also invaded Iraq. Now, did Iraq attack us? No. Did Iraq possess any weapons of mass destruction? They did. They had about 500 canisters of mustard gas. This is what we found. Mustard gas. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't want to poo-poo mustard gas. I wouldn't want to be exposed to this stuff. But here's the thing about mustard gas, guys. It's a World War I era ordinance, okay? It's not some radical thing that's going to just destroy the world, okay? That was all they found were a couple hundred old canisters. I mean, we're talking 1980s vintage, old canisters of mustard gas. I don't know if they said made in the USA on them or not, but that's all they found. They didn't have weapons of mass destruction. And by the way, you know, if they weren't violating UN sanctions, then what exactly were we bitching about Saddam in the first place for? I don't get it. I don't get it. Especially when, of course, we're the ones who gave most of those weapons in the first place. We propped them up. But all of this, propping them up, tearing them down, all of this was done over money. And as if that wasn't bad enough, we've now privatized a large portion of the military. And I'm not just talking about defense contractors. I'm talking about outfits like Blackwater and other contractors that went over to Iraq to engage in the all-American pastime of nation building. I will say this. Rush Limbaugh once said that we should not be doing nation building. Our military is designed to win wars, not nation build. Now, he was saying this when Clinton was in office. I don't think he ever said that when Bush was trying to nation build in Iraq. But I have to admit, I agree with him. Our military shouldn't be nation building because our military is armed with bombs and guns, and you can't really build a whole lot with bombs and guns. I don't think I'm really out on a limb there. But we have all these private contractors who wasted billions of dollars. It just disappeared. We don't know what happened to it. We weren't really keeping track. You mean we had to account for that? Oh, man. And then, of course, all these Blackwater guys that end up committing war crimes on our behalf. And it was like, guys, we're making ourselves look bad enough. We don't really need your help. Okay? Again, you know what? Foreign policy should be the realm of the state and the state alone. And profit should not. That obviously leads to some very dangerous conclusions. Now, I want to finish this all back where I started, and that's the fifth category that the profit motive really doesn't have any place, and that is religion. We're coming right back to where I started, back on religion. Now, it might sound very cynical that I'm saying, religion is like Religion Inc., that it's like this profit money-making thing, okay? Let's step back for a moment, and I'm not going to take the easy shot. I'm not going to just point out the hypocrisy of a guy needing a private jet to spread the word of Jesus. Okay, I'm not going to talk about a congregation that spent, $20-30 million to build a megachurch as opposed to building homes for the homeless or soup kitchens or something like that. I'm not going to talk about the, Pat Robertson, who is he a billionaire? I don't know. He's pretty wealthy and preaches the word of Jesus that somehow leaves out everything about going to the poor. A couple of points here. First of all, one of the things Pat Robertson, one of the most offensive things about him is that the particular brand of theology that he preaches goes by the part of it anyway, goes under the prosperity theology, which basically says if you are being rewarded with material goods in this life, God must love what you're doing, and he will reward you with money. Now, I was raised Catholic, and I've actually been exposed to the Bible a little bit. And I remember the thing about Lucifer taking Jesus up on the mountain and tempting him and whatnot. And I kind of have a sense of how the devil operates. After all, I'm a liberal. So I would think that if anybody is saying, you're doing a great thing, hating them gays and burning them churches and shooting them niggers and all that stuff, and God's rewarding you with financial wealth, That ain't God, guys. I don't believe in God or the devil, but if I did, there is no question in my mind that the best evidence for the existence of the devil is prosperity theology and is people like Pat Robertson and what he preaches. Okay? Because I don't, you know what? I think of the perfect Catholic. I think of my grandmother, and she's very giving, and she feels guilty about taking anything for herself, and she's one of the most selfless people you'll ever meet. Oh, she's always up in your business. Don't get me wrong. Nosy as hell, but she's a very giving person. And I just picture her next to Pat Robertson. I'm going, making my eye twitch. So, but here's the thing. I don't want to, that's the easy route. That's the easy route. I mean, I think that's obvious why that's not a good influence. But here's the thought. Let's say for a moment that I did believe in the soul and heaven and God and all of that. And I'm looking for someone to give me guidance, spiritual guidance, because I want my eternal soul trusted to the most good person, the wisest person. Should that be done on the cheap? Should that be done on a discount? Should I be trusting the guy who collects the most money, has the best commercial, runs the most profitable church? If a soul is a real thing and God is a real thing and judgment is a real thing, well, I can't think of a single theology under which that it would be a good idea to have a profit motive involved with living your life on earth. It would be terrible. So again, I think whether you look at it cynically, Religion Inc., if you will, or whether you look at it truly deeply and spiritually and actually believe in this and are looking for true guidance, again, I can say that the profit motive is not going to be particularly helpful in that realm. So, that's kind of my five things. There are others, but, obviously, money has way too much influence in our politics. Religion has too much influence in our politics. And it's really that cross-section of money and religion that the Republican Party thrives off of. But they're losing the money, especially when people are realizing the inevitability of Hillary Clinton. And I've said the inevitable Hillary Clinton so many times on this program and written it so many times on my blog that I'm going to look a damn fool if she loses. But I think they realize a winner when they see one, and a lot of the money has started to back Hillary. Money that the Republicans should be able to just be raking in. But of course, they can't win without the wackos, and the wackos are alienating the center, which is making the money go away. And I think the best example of this, and this is where I'm really encouraged, and I've mentioned it a couple times, but the religious freedom laws, which, let's face it, that's going to be the next phase of this fight. These religious freedom laws. Can businesses decide to discriminate against, well, anybody, really? I mean, because it doesn't have to be gays. I mean, it could be blacks, it could be Jews, it could be atheists, it could be Democrats, it could be liberals, it could be trans people, it could be, anybody who doesn't wear the right hat or wear the right necklace or whatever, and do we really want to live in that world? I mean, do we want to live in a world where everybody has to find a baker that services their specific needs, as opposed to, how about I just go to the market and buy a fucking cake? I'm a real bake the fucking cake. Just shut the fuck up and bake the fucking cake kind of guy when it comes to this stuff. And I don't see that as a violation of religious liberty. You went into business to make cakes. So when somebody comes in with money and wants a cake, that's what you went into business to do. That doesn't violate your religion. If making a cake violates your religion, get the fuck out of the cake making business. Done. Problem solved. But these religious freedom bills are going to be the next major fight. And it's already starting. But I am encouraged. One of the most encouraging things, it's not often that I'm encouraged by corporate America, but when I look at what happened in Indiana, and when I look at what's happened in Texas and Louisiana and other places, big business, big companies are telling these right-wing Republican whack jobs, people that they would have been filleting a generation ago, now they're running like hell from them. IBM pulled out their, well, they didn't pull the factory out, but they stopped the big ribbon cutting ceremony. They didn't want to be seen with Bobby Jindal. Of course, that was symbolic, but then you got Indiana, which people were literally boycotting, and businesses were pulling out and not expanding in that state. And again, as a liberal, I should not have corporate America on my side, but it's very encouraging from the point of view of social progress to see that the money is finally following that, and the money is leaving religion. Now, that maybe actually that cleanses religion a little bit. And as long as religion goes back to acting like a decent human being, I suppose that's okay. But it is an odd sign of progress. And I do think that this is going to be ultimately a losing battle for the Republicans. And I think the best bellwether of that is corporate response. More companies are putting in at least official policies. Now, whether or not they actually come to practice is another story entirely. I know the reality of non-discrimination rules versus non-discrimination reality. I get that. But more companies are moving towards LGBT inclusion then they are going to sort of, okay, we expect you to do this and we're not going to hire these people and blah, 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 blah. More are moving towards inclusion. And, again, with the marriage deal, it's going to be almost impossible for them because, of course, you can't fire somebody for being married. I mean, that's pretty blatant discrimination. So denying them health care, that's going to be difficult. I mean, life is going to be difficult for these people. But the thing is that big corporations are not going in that direction for the first time that I can remember. I mean, usually, again, they embrace the Republicans. And even if they don't officially endorse what the radical religious right has been screaming about, they realized that they were useful. They realized they were supporting the guys who were supporting them. So they went along with it. And they know that has broken. That it no longer is the case. And I don't want to say ever will be again, because things change. It was only, when I think about how long, from Ronald Reagan to where I am today, if you go backwards, you're going to, you're almost back to the New Deal. So things don't last forever, but I am encouraged that in the near future, even if the Republicans do manage to figure out a way through this mess that they've created for themselves, we've moved forward. They cannot be that party anymore. I don't know, or if they continue to be, they're going to continue to lose. So I'm very interested in seeing how 2016 plays out. I'm interested to seeing which Republican comes out of the clown car to win the nomination. I guess I will leave you with a prediction. I will leave the Republicans with some advice. Right now, even with all the momentum that Bernie Sanders is getting, let's be realistic. Hillary Clinton is getting the nomination. I'm sorry, guys. I know that annoys a lot of people. And actually, it should annoy me because I'm not a Hillary Clinton fan. In fact, before I really knew anything about him, I once said that if it came down to Chris Christie versus Hillary Clinton, I might vote for Christie. Now, I've eaten those words because Christie turned out to be a huge douchebag. But my feelings about Clinton haven't necessarily changed. I don't necessarily like Hillary Clinton. I don't like how close she is to Wall Street. I don't like how hawkish she is on foreign policy. But I do think she'll make a competent president. Would I rather have a progressive? Would I rather have Bernie Sanders? Would I rather have Martin O'Malley? That the LaRouche folks from a couple weeks ago endorsed. Yes, absolutely I would. But pragmatic compromise is going to win the day. And I think it's going to win the day with a lot of people. And I think that while Bernie Sanders' presence in the race will make the conversation more interesting, I think Hillary is inevitably the Democratic nomination, and that's bad for the Republicans because I think that she is a sure thing to win. I know people talk about her divisiveness, but she's really only divisive to conservatives. And I think they overestimate. Again, they've missed the ball on where the rest of America is. She's not as divisive as they think, I should say. The best chance for the Republicans to win, Jeb Bush or Rand Paul. Jeb Bush, because even though he's really not the smart one, and even though George Bush kind of ruined everything, Jeb Bush might just be the least offensive guy there. And before anybody starts telling me about how horrible Jeb Bush is, consider his competition. Okay, compare Jeb Bush to Ted Cruz. Compare him to Ben Carson. Compare him to Donald Trump. Okay, compare him to Rick Santorum or Scott Walker or Rick Scott or God, who else is in that clown car? Again, the competition isn't exactly fierce, guys. So I would say that Jeb Bush is arguably the least offensive. Now, he's already shown a habit of putting his foot right in his mouth. But hey, a lot of people thought that was charming when George W. did it. Enough to get him elected. So you never know. Maybe this is a, Bush me once, shame on you, Bush me, can't get bushed again kind of moment. I don't know. But I think Jeb Bush and or Rand Paul, and I say Rand Paul because I think Rand Paul might peel away some of those moderates and some of those younger voters from the Democrats who get fooled by this pseudo-libertarianism. He's not a libertarian. He's a Republican. He has basically turned his back on everything that separates libertarians from Republicans. Libertarians would support gay marriage. They would support abortion and be pro-choice. They would support marijuana legalization. He's backed off of all of that stuff. Okay, they also don't want to go to war with everybody. He's backed off on that too and said, yeah, I'm going to be a strong supporter of Israel, which basically means endless war in the Middle East. We'll talk about Israel's a complicated situation. We'll deal with that another time. But I think that Jeb Bush or Rand Paul is the only chance either one of those guys or both of them on the same ticket. I think a Bush-Paul ticket would work very well for them. But in order for that to work, I think anybody but Hillary Clinton has to be on the Democratic ticket. I think if you have those two things, Paul and or Bush, and not Hillary, I think the Republicans have a chance. I think that's the only chance they got. Again, it's 18 months away. A lot can happen, but it's going to be an interesting run. But I just see more of the same coming. I don't know what they're going to pull out of the hat. There can't possibly be an October surprise when it comes to Hillary Clinton. I mean, the Clintons have been the most scrutinized family in America. Since the Rosenbergs. I mean, these guys, they have been in and out of every bit of their business, and they have found dick. And once Bill got out of the picture, they found nothing. Okay? There's, all this Benghazi stuff, nothing. By the way, Bush had 11 Benghazis. I mean, if you look at the embassy attacks under Bush, there were 11 of them. I can rattle them off at a different time because I'm running up on my hour here. But he had 11 Benghazis and something like 50 or 60 people dead. Maybe it was more than that. No Republican outrage, but they're going to say Benghazi, Benghazi, Benghazi. It's an empty well. They're not trying to get to the truth. They're trying to maintain the illusion that there's a truth to be gotten to. And it's getting thin. The act is getting a little bit stale. What on earth are they going to find at this point about Hillary Clinton? That she deleted some emails? Colin Powell did that. George Bush did that. Richard Nixon did that. I mean, who cares? Nobody gives a shit. The only people who care about that shit are people who weren't voting for Hillary in the first place, who weren't voting Democrat in the first place. At the end of the day, if Ted Cruz or somebody of that ilk is looking like they're going to win, the liberals who are disaffected by Hillary Clinton are not going to stay home. I don't care what they say. Anyway, that's it for me, folks. Thank you for tuning in and listening. As always, if you have any questions or comments about anything you've heard here today, please feel free to email me at niceguy9418@usa.com. You can friend me on Facebook at Eddie Cabot. You can leave a comment on my blog at eddiecabot.blogspot.com. Love to hear from you. Also, if you have any suggestions for future guest shows or topics, love to hear from you. This has been In My Humble Opinion with Nice Guy Eddie. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday listening to Rainbow Radio.